And we're live. Hi, everyone. Thanks again. This is a coaching conversation. I'm Todd Cargus. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Izzy Rodriguez. And we're going to talk today about overcoming mindfulness skepticism. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But first off, Izzy, why don't you spend a little bit of time introducing yourself?
Hello, everyone. Hi, Todd. Thank you for having me. So I'm Izzy Rodriguez. I am a leadership coach who works with mid-level managers in the technology space. Clients include people who live in North America and Europe. And I take a feedback-informed approach to coaching. There's so much feedback that we have available to us. And my interest is in helping clients leverage that feedback so that they can make informed choices.
That's awesome. Thanks. And I'm laughing because we've already got Amy Coop, my friend Amy, in the chat, giving us a woot woot. And thank you very much for that, Amy.
Boots are accepted.
I know, right? This is awesome. I'm looking forward to it. So thanks for the cheers, which is a really good reminder too. If you want to participate in this conversation, I'll be paying attention to the chat and we'll be doing it. So this is live, everyone. This is super live. So Izzy, do you want to just jump right in? Because I think like mindfulness skepticism is a really, really interesting topic. And I wonder, why don't we start off real fast by just defining what we mean by mindfulness? Because I think it's one of those things that is easy to understand when you're like in the thick of it. You really do it all the time. But I think that for sort of, the normies out there like me, it can mean sort of different things to different people. So what does it mean to you?
Well, so I rely on a definition that I read from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's
Okay.
a mindfulness expert. And I'm going to read it just so that I don't screw it up.
Yeah, sure.
Mindfulness is the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present with a non-judgmental, attitude that is for the purpose of self-understanding and wisdom.
I like that. And off the top of my head, there's like 2 or 3 things, or maybe 3 or 4 things in there that sound hard.
Preaching to the choir, yes.
Exactly. So I love that. I think that's a really, really good place for us to start, right? Because there's lots of paths to mindfulness, and there's lots of ways that we can do it. But maybe, we started this off by talking about skepticism in mindfulness, and I know that we both, when we talked earlier, we both have sort of I'm going to say a robust history of skepticism within the context of mindfulness. and maybe, I don't know, do you want to start with that one, or do you want me to take a crack at what is the skepticism in mindfulness?
Well, so I want to frame that
Sure.
discussion first. So this conversation, as it's evolved, is really about acknowledging the skepticism that we've both have felt about mindfulness. This is not meant in any way to challenge the validity or helpfulness of mindfulness, in and of itself. We're just talking about our journey into acceptance versus challenging what some people hold very dear. And I think you and I are beginning to hold more dear as we grow.
Agreed.
Right. So I'll kick us off there, but frame the conversation.
And thank you for framing it that way too. And just for clarity, Amy, that's not just for you. Amy, yeah, exactly. Well, Amy is a mindfulness and meditation expert, and so having her in our audience is fantastic. So I think framing it that way is really important. It's not about a present skepticism, but rather, sort of a past skepticism. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I cut you off.
No, so I took a stab. I framed it. So what comes up for you when I framed it that way and offer the definition of mindfulness from Jon Kabat-Zinn?
Yeah. So in my past, what comes up, and I don't even mean like, when I was in my 20s. I mean like my not that distant past. I would have thought of mindfulness and meditation as something that's like navel gazing, like it's woo woo. And what I mean by that is, you know, I held a very firm belief that I could think my way, like cognitively think my way through whatever problem I needed to. And it wasn't until I was confronted with problems that couldn't be thought through that sort of, even just sort of the slightest little kind of inkling into mindfulness and meditation started to become interesting, or I became curious about the possibility. But it was so foreign and so strange that it still didn't resonate. Like it still felt like, you know, religion. And, you know, I'm gonna probably trigger someone by saying that, but yeah, it felt like religion. Oh, hang on. And so Amy's contribution here was great. Like, I always say, don't take my word for it. Try it and see what you find. And that skepticism is welcome. So Amy, thank you very much for that, because I think we're gonna sort of be playing with a little bit of that. So much you.
So much of what you said, Todd, just resonates with me. So I think my skepticism originally came from my lived experience. I grew up in a very impoverished community where at least my experience is really focused on like the next, like where's the next paycheck going to come from? Where's the next, when are we going to be able to buy groceries this month? Are we going to be able to attend school and be safe? So there wasn't space in my lived experience to have separateness, to have a moment where I could sort of take stock of what's happening. So like I felt as though I was like traveling on a treadmill that didn't have an off button. Right. And so there was no space to be able to reflect or to carve out space to just be, or to notice. And I think that's initially where my skepticism came from. There was no time because the present moment demanded X, Y, or Z from me.
That's so interesting. And because it hadn't occurred to me that there is an intersection between the skepticism of of mindfulness and privilege. And I think, you know, like so many things, right? I mean, you know, it is probably a feature of my privilege that I hadn't been able to put that intersection together before. So thank you for that. I think that's really interesting. And like accessibility is at the core of some of that skepticism, is what I'm hearing. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's also important to know is that, you know, even though our lived experiences are different, we end up in the same place, right? So like the route itself doesn't matter to me as much as the fact that whatever happened in our childhoods and beyond or shaped our thinking as adults, that we've then become more open, more curious to what this thing called mindfulness is.
Yeah. I love the definition. I understand the skepticism. And I'm thinking, like, I wonder if the right next thing to talk about is like, what was the thing? Like, what got you there? What was
Yeah. So, okay. So what got me there is my aspirations to become a coach. I had been working with graduate and law students for the better part of my career. And really, there's this desire to always work in service to and being supportive of others. In this context, it was academic and professional goals. But as I evolved into, my identity now as a coach, you know, I really needed to get clear on what are the ways in which the brain increases the efficiency of communication so that we could make improvements with focus and focus of attention and also the ability to sharpen our thinking. And so the real sort of like the real genesis for me was really doing a deep dive into understanding the neurological and neurobiological processes afoot in learning, in growing, in being able to self-regulate and manage. So that's where it started for me, this curiosity about systems that, quite frankly, I didn't know anything about.
Right. Well, and I think that's the thing is there is that leap, that the curiosity happens in something that you don't know anything about and need to build. I want to acknowledge Dr. Ronaldo Lano. I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong, but anyway, thank you for being here, Dr. Ronaldo. And I also want to acknowledge Mark Petipa, who's here and is offering something to us, more the Mindful Way workbook. That Mark says changed his life, which is fantastic. So thanks for that. I tripped over all those names, so I'm going to apologize because it's wearing my glasses and they're for distance and they're for close, they're not for distance. And anyway, blah blah blah.
We accept you.
Mindfulness. Thanks. I'm thinking I could use a mindful practice right now because I just got deregulated. No, I love what you said about it being, becoming curious about something that didn't seem accessible, and I'll echo that. For me, the entry point was, to be honest, was an acute anxiety disorder, which I was not having any success with in all of the traditional ways, and after decades and decades of not being able to think my way through that, I realized that it was something that I would need to feel my way through. And in order to feel my way through it, I needed help. Like I needed something different than what I was traditionally sort of doing, and really being present to panic attacks and being present to anxiety was a really, really challenging and difficult thing to do because I wanted to push it away. And I think it's that word presence that sort of becomes important for me, because the thing is like we're always present to something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's maybe not what is most helpful in the moment, and there's always stuff that we don't want to be with, and it's right, and that stuff that we don't want to be with, for me anyway, is where the mindfulness practice happened, because it kind of created enough space for me to be okay with being with that stuff that was scary or uncomfortable or unpleasant or whatever.
Yeah, Todd, I thank you for your ability to be so vulnerable in this space. Wrestling with anxiety is something that I think is very relatable, and I commend you for wanting to disclose that here. How I make sense of what you're saying is like your anxiety is, akin to, it sounds like there's some manifestations that are similar to like my legal blindness. So there's a real physical limitation as to how I interact in the world, a world that wasn't built for me. And so the sort of the desire to want to problem solve, the desire to want to have certainty and predictability is really outweighed in terms of my lived experience. It really outweighs the more feeling centric, more, let's explore with some curiosity, predictability be damned, aspect that I think has also made me resistant. But what incidentally is really the kicker here is that it's precisely that's allowed for me to be in the present moment, because one has to be aware of one's circumstances. What information am I not receiving because I have a real physical limitation? And so it's the birthplace of intuition. It's the birthplace of like connectivity, being able to really articulate what it is you want and need.
Being able to articulate what you want to need. And that seems so simple, doesn't it? It seems so simple, but it isn't.
But it's reflective practice that happens over time. It's a
Yes.
reflective practice that you grow into, even though it started out as a very, at least for me, this very
Right.
black and white problem solving. There's a challenge. These are the three options ahead of you.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. 3. Oh my God. Yeah. 3 or 30 or 300. And right. I've made this joke many times, and it's really maybe not a funny joke, but for most of my life, I kind of imagined that my body was just the meat taxi that took my brain from place to place. And and
I love that.
and well, I mean, I'm glad that I'm not there anymore. And to be honest, I think that it was sort of taking on or being open to a practice of mindfulness. Even though I'm just gonna say too, like I still bristle when I hear the word mindfulness. Like it for whatever reason, that particular word just kind of rubs me the wrong way. So I'm sure there's different words, and if we hear something, then I'd love to hear an option. I also want to note that Amy's in the chat too, so I want to call this up and make sure that your voice is heard. So +1 on the history of anxiety and panic attacks. Appreciate you sharing your experience, Todd and Izzy, what you're saying about how the world is created for a normal, i.e. nervous system sensory abilities that doesn't actually exist. And what I love about that, Amy, is an acknowledgement that normal doesn't exist. And if normal doesn't exist, then everything's normal. And something becomes possible, I think, within that space of everything is normal. But in order for that to be true, there's a self-trust that needs to exist. And that's my take on it. And until that self-trust could develop, there really wasn't an opportunity to explore or an opportunity to even be curious about certain things.
So I'm wondering, Todd, if you could give self-trust some more texture and color.
Sure. Okay, cool. So let's talk about the Todd who lived in his brain, and you said knowing all 3 options, and I'm looking at that really beautiful white wall that you have behind you, Izzy, and imagining that there's a part of me in my life once upon a time where I would have had a really fine sort of Sharpie that could have written on the wall and created a really detailed flow chart with all of the potential possibilities for every potential situation that I might find myself in. And frankly, all of the time that I wasted coming up with all of those potential situations and then being thrown completely off my game when something that I hadn't considered as a possibility came up. And that was functioning from a place of cognitive trust, but not self-trust. I trusted myself to come up with all the possible possibilities, but there's no way I could come up with all the possible possibilities. So what does it mean to just sort of trust my ability to surf whatever that wave happens to be, even if it's kind of nasty, even if it's kind of big.
Mm-hmm. And what changed for you?
Started with the anxiety, because the practice became, it was a somatic practice to start off with, right? Like, and I think I mentioned this before we started talking too. I've lately been in the habit of trying to notice things without having to evaluate them, notice things without having to analyze them. And a good friend of mine described it as, sometimes understanding or knowing gets in the way of experiencing. And I've been trying to sort of separate those things in such a way that I can notice. And that's really where it started for me too, was noticing, when anxiety happens, when a panic attack happens, what's happening to me in my body? Like,
Yes.
What's actually happening? Because it's not in my head. My head's responding to something else. So and just giving myself just that much space, just a little tiny bit of space to kind of go, hey, what's that that's going on? Just opened it up just a little bit, but it had to be slow. Like it was baby steps. Like, what's that? Oh, like that feels like a stomach ache. That feels like, my shoulders are in my ears. That feels like whatever. And instead of, and that's bad, it was just, okay, that exists.
Yeah.
What else exists? What else is here? What else is
What I'm
here?
hearing is a lot of like feedback that you're receiving, and you're choosing to be present in the moment when that feedback is happening and staying curious about what that
Yes.
feedback is, what's being conveyed. And that's
Yes.
very much how I sort of stumbled my way into mindfulness, is like really
Yes.
paying attention. So at first the trajectory was like, let's do this thing, let's understand the science to get better at being attuned to my clients. What are the neurobiological processes that work for them, so I can understand that and do this cerebral thing. And then something clicked where, in small doses, as you've mentioned, I was able then to become more attuned to what my body was telling me.
Yes.
What was coming up, what was manifesting. And that is all the affects: joy, fear, exhaustion, frustration, all the sort of permutations of that. And what happens then when I move my body, like in terms of self-regulation? How can I manifest a different perspective? But it didn't happen all at once. It happened in small bite-sized pieces. And it really happened over a course of years to be able to practice becoming more attuned to what my body was saying to me.
Yes. Yes. And I think I just love that. I think because, well, and what I love about it too is this is all the things that we're talking about, the noticing, all of the like, what is this emotion? Am I giving myself space to, right? It absolutely is all mindfulness. And we haven't even touched yet. We haven't even touched or tickled the concept of meditation yet, which I still find really challenging, although I am trying to do. And like, all of these things are possible within a context of simple curiosity and presence. Like, it's really quite accessible. And I think that's the thing that I think is really cool about what you're describing.
Thank you. When it comes to like mindfulness practices, like meditation, I struggle with it too. But in this exploration of like, noticing what my body is saying in response to whatever stimuli is happening, I'm also playing with, and there's this ability to play with what works for me. So rather than listen to a mindfulness meditation episode, a mindfulness practice for me is taking a walk in the forest that's a few blocks away from our house.
Yeah.
Without headphones, without a podcast or an audiobook playing, without an agenda, just kind of being and listening. And for me, so that feels I feel less skeptical of that. It feels, for whatever reason, more accessible to me. And I think that's, one of the things that I've learned is that mindfulness is curated for who I am. And I'm the
Yes.
person in charge of that agenda.
Yes. Yes. And that's true for all of us, right? It's true. And not just because we're coaches, but it's true for the people that we coach. It's true for people that we don't coach. There's an agency that exists. And you asked me earlier about self-trust. And I think that the essential ingredient in self-trust is agency. And if we can see that we're in charge of where that goes, I think that's like, I think that's really, really cool.
But also,
Karen has
just demonstrating we're in charge of where that goes, but we're in charge of how we define it for ourselves,
which is also extremely important, and I like that. Karen's got a link. Whoa, it's big, but we're gonna do it. The word mindfulness used to trigger me too. Thank you for that, Karen. It made me think of a yogi on a mountaintop and didn't feel connected to my real life in the business world. Yep. Okay. I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing with that, because that's very true. When my coach asked me if I could just be present with my thoughts, feelings, and sensations, and with my external surroundings that changed, it was the language that tripped me up. and I had to get there in a way that worked for me. And thank you so much for sharing that, Karen, because I think that's exactly 100% true. And it has an impact that is beyond what we think it might be. And I think that's the so what of all of this that's really interesting. Like the so what of overcoming the skepticism is that the rewards are like nothing I've ever experienced before. And I think, I honestly feel like I'm still just sort of touching the surface, like the tip of the iceberg kind of stuff. And if you don't mind my saying, I want to kind of add to this, right? Like I talked about anxiety a little while ago, and I'm rather proud of myself because I do not take anti-anxiety meds anymore, and it's mindfulness that has helped me get to that point. So I have a very different relationship with that part of me now than I did before. But one of the things that mindfulness allowed was for me to actually allow for it to exist. And you know, and not to sound, and this is going to sound woo-woo, but here I go, right? You know, there's an element of self-love. There's an element of, like, you know, self-acceptance, right? All of that has to happen. And it needs to be all of the things, even the things that are uncomfortable and unpleasant. And man, oh man, this was uncomfortable and unpleasant. And really it was just like, you know, what if I stopped pushing and started, you know, pulling in instead? What would happen? What would be different? So, yeah, Amy's got a really interesting thing here. She says the Tibetan word for meditation is gom, which translates to familiarization. And I really, really like that a lot. So thank you, Amy. Yeah. What about you? Like, what's been the is there something about mindfulness that's been like, that's juicy, that's awesome, that's something that I want to share?
Yeah, so for me, mindfulness really is in the doing. It's an active thing. I'm not someone who I get the quiet of the mind only after I've been active. So in my daily practice, what I try to do, and there's not a focus on perfection here, is before every coaching call, for example, I do a 30-minute spin class.
Oh, wow.
And that is for the purpose of helping me get grounded and centered so that I am attuned to what the client is talking about. And what that's so there's a real specific purpose. I'm an ethical coach. I want to just demonstrate that in every which way that I can. But it's been transformative because whenever I've noticed that there's something that I'm avoiding, resisting, challenged by, like I've developed this sort of mini routine to go do something that takes me out of the fear and anxiety that I'm experiencing so that I'm allowed to be more present. So it's really about this agency. So that's number one. And number two is the shift in perspective on what mindfulness is. And I think we've alluded and we've talked about in different ways. Like, I think it's the brand name recognition that I was resisting more than the actual doing it.
Yep.
So the brand mindfulness doesn't sit well with me. Like it it feels too commercial, too conglomerate, too, not a corporate, like a corporate in the worst sense of the word. But if I think about being mindful, like if it's part of my identity, I am a mindful person. I am a gym goer versus I'm someone who goes to the gym. Like what's shifted for me is its relationship to who I am as a person. That's been transformative.
Knowing yourself, like really, truly knowing yourself and your essence.
Or peeling back the layers of the onion and continuing to learn about who I am as I
that's fun.
Continue to grow in this crazy life that I have.
That's awesome. I love it. Izzy, I could talk to you for a really long time about this, and I'm looking at the time, and we're a minute away from where we're supposed to end. Is there anything that you want to make sure gets said that hasn't been said?
Trust yourself. Todd brought up the idea of trust, and I would say for me that was a big part of my journey to mindfulness, toward mindfulness, becoming a mindful person. If you're interested in neuroscience, Anne Murphy Paul's The Extended Mind is a pivotal book. Of course, I would always recommend the works of John Kabat-Zinn in terms of resources. And that's what I will leave you with.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Izzy, if folks who are listening to this want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn is the best way. Izzy Israel Rodriguez. Here on LinkedIn, feel free to reach out and have a conversation with me.
Fabulous. And that's great. And thank you. And I'm Todd Kargas. You can reach me here on LinkedIn or on my website, which is www.toddkargas.com. And to everyone who's joined and to everyone who's here, and actually, you know what? There's one thing, I'm sorry, but Dr. Leno mentioned, is purposeful a better word? And actually, I really like that word, and so I'm gonna cook on that one. So thank you,
Ronaldo, for adding that to the chat. I appreciate
exactly.
You.
And with that, I'm going to sign off. And thank you so much, Izzy, for spending this time with me today. And thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. Ciao.